Hello, this is Anna Merley from North East Animal Rights, coming to you again from Newcastle, and we're at Grace Monument today from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and it would be lovely for you to come along and see us. It would be great to talk to you. Today we're talking about a fish feel pain fact. Okay, it might seem a strange title, but obviously you'll work it out when we're going to do this, why we wanted to, we thought it was so important to do this. So I've split it into a few different sections: pollution, other animals, the fish themselves, the healthy myth, and natural pain part of it as well. So, like basically all of these reasons why we should be avoiding fish. So first of all, let's talk about the pollution part of it. 80% of life on Earth actually lives in the oceans. Okay, 80% of life on Earth. There's 150 million tons of rubbish, plastic rubbish in the oceans, and 46% of that 150 million tons is from ghost nets. Now, ghost nets are those left behind by commercial trawlers. They have no use to them, so they just dump them, they just leave them in the oceans, and they cause absolutely catastrophes all over the place in the oceans. But we also have longline fishing as well. There's enough lines left in the oceans on a daily basis to go around the world 5 times. Plastic straws obviously cause a devastating effect on the oceans as well in terms of pollution, but in comparison of that 150 million tonnes, they are 0.03% of that pollution. And things like the oil spills, the Exxon oil spills. There was a deep water one in Mexico a few years ago. Commercial fishing kills more fish in one day than these oil spills kill in over 3 months. But everybody's absolutely devastated when these oil spills happen, because quite rightly so, they are absolutely devastating for the environment, but so is commercial fishing on a much bigger scale. So let's talk about the other animals in the oceans as well. So dolphins, sharks, whales and turtles. There's a place in Japan called Taiji, Taiji, so please look it up. And when you're going on holiday and you're visiting places like SeaWorld, you will very likely come across a dolphin which has been caught in a place like Taiji. Okay, but you need to bear in mind, for every dolphin you see performing in front of you, 12 dolphins have been killed. It's an absolutely horrendous industry, and Taiji alone kills 700 dolphins and small whales per year. They're driven into the shore by the fishermen in the boats, and they have iron rods driven into their blowholes to kill the animals. And the majority of them aren't eaten; they're basically captured. They go into captivity. But it's like for every one animal you see at SeaWorld, 12 have died to get to that point. And dolphins, are very, very expensive to buy. They also get killed because they eat bluefin tuna, and bluefin tuna is one of the most expensive fish in the world. It's not unknown for one bluefish tuna to actually reach $3 million for one fish. It's a $42 billion industry every single year. And the Japanese firm Mitsubishi owns 40% of it. 10,000 dolphins are killed on the French coast alone, and there are 300,000 whales and dolphins killed yearly because of bluefin tuna fishing. So now let's talk about sharks. So everybody sees sharks as this sort of a very menacing creature lurking around the oceans. But sharks have a really, really bad, they get a bad deal from humans. Shark fin soup, which is seen as a delicacy, which reaches, like $100 per bowl. Sharks have a very important role to play in the biodiversity of the oceans. They keep the fish stocks under control. They also help the coral reefs flourish as well. But they are caught in nets, dragged in, have the fins chopped off, and then they are thrown unceremoniously back into the oceans where they'll die. They'll drown because they can't swim properly. Okay, depending on which study you read, but I'll take lower figures, sort of 80%. They've seen an 80% decrease in their numbers in the last few decades. They've been absolutely decimated. 11,000 sharks are being killed every single hour. Now, if you put that into context in terms of, everybody sees, like I said, these sharks as menacing animals lurking around the oceans, killing people. Sharks will kill 10 people annually, okay, around the world, but we are killing 11,000 of their species every single hour. And sea turtles don't come off lightly either. They get caught, as bycatch as well. So around the US coast, 250,000 sea turtles get killed every single year. Now, whaling is a controversial subject. We have an international whaling ban that was brought in 1986, but you have places like Japan in the main who flout it. They're not really interested. They don't take any notice of this international ban, and they're not bothered about the outcry, the international outcry about it either. They see it as part of their cultural heritage to be able to do this. It's not culture, it's just murder. It's as simple as that. It's just murdering a beautiful animal. The Faroe Islands, this is a little bit closer to home in terms of it's a Danish territory, the Faroe Islands up in the north there. And they have this brutal, again, a cultural event which they call, it's called the Grindadrap. The Grindadrap is Danish for whale murder. Okay, so that kind of tells you it is what exactly that. They say it is a cultural event. It's part of like a rite of passage. They basically have a Grindadrap master who will have they will be sort of being constant alert in terms of information coming in for these pods of whales. As soon as one's spotted, all the boats will go out. They will drive the whales into shore, and they are literally just jumped on and hacked to death. Okay. The worst thing about this as well is they actually get their children to take part in this. So if you have a look at some of the photographs from the Grindadrap, you'll see children climbing on board, climbing on top of these whales, hacking them to death. In the most brutal fashion. The seas are running red with blood. It's absolutely horrendous. But again, they will argue this is their cultural right to do that. So now we're going to fish. Okay, so the main reason why we're doing this outreach today, everybody sees fish as the happy, the comfort food, the fish and chips, cat and bird's eye, on the television. Even bird's eye are getting in on the green boom now because they are producing plant-based alternatives as well. But it's misleading to say it's a healthy alternative because it isn't, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But in terms of numbers of fish killed, there's 2.7 trillion fish killed every single year. Okay, that's 5 million per minute. The numbers of fish in the oceans have halved since the 1970s. But 20 million tonnes of fish are used for non-human purposes, so they're not actually even reaching the table. So people can't say that they're being killed for food for humans. They're not. They've actually been used for food for farmed fish and for farmed animals like chickens. There's two types of fishing, commercial fishing, sort of on big scales. There's actual commercial fishing itself, the trawlers, but there's also commercial aquaculture as well. This is supposed to be the environmental solution to commercial fishing. Commercial fishing is usually the trawlers, and it's so destructive. It absolutely wrecks the biodiversity. They're literally bottom trawling, dragging everything up with it as well. Now, we've talked in the past about greenhouse gas emissions, and CO2, carbon dioxide, is a big contributor towards greenhouse gases and climate change. The oceans have the capacity to store 93% of carbon dioxide, and the plants in the oceans have the capacity to store 20% of carbon dioxide. So obviously they are massive contributors in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. 1% loss of the marine life, the plant life in the oceans is equivalent to 97 million car emissions. Okay, so 1% of the plants who can hold 20% of the carbon dioxide in the waters, that's 97 million car emissions. Now, if we go into the longliners, people sort of see, when you see the tins of food and the tins of dead fish, they will have little claims. This is a longline fish caught. It's been caught by longline fish methods, almost like it's a traditional method, but it's not. It isn't. Longliners are long lines with hand-baited hooks put onto them, and obviously they will lie in the waters, and the fish will go and take the bait. The fish get picked off, by predators, so that they'll be hanging around in the water. It's an awful, horrendously drawn-out death. There's also purse seiners as well. Now these are big nets, which are called because they actually resemble purses with purse strings on them. So these purse seiners can be, like 2 kilometers long. They're thrown out and then they're drawn into a circle and then they're pulled tight so the fish obviously can't escape. And they're 2,000 meters deep as well. There's an awful lot of problems with these because there's an awful lot of bycatch in them. So bycatch is basically, it's not their target fish. If they're trying to catch cod, for example, and they catch all sorts of other varieties of fish as well, other species. Fish will die from suffocation within the nets because obviously it's a large number of fish in a very small area. They'll suffer from decompression injuries when they're brought out of the water as well, and predators, because the predators are actually caught with them as well. Now let's look at fish farms. So this is supposed to be the environmental version of it as well. So fish farms, for starters, primarily, the majority of them are based in Scotland, because obviously there's a big call for Atlantic salmon. And they have a lot of subsidies from the Scottish governments and the UK governments when they're actually based in England and Wales. You have fish who are in these tanks who are swimming round and round and round aimlessly. They're eaten alive and they're cannibalised because the fish are so stressed. This is not normal behaviour for these fish. They're swimming in their own filth as well. One salmon farm produces the equivalent waste of a small town of 10,000 people. So that's just one salmon farm. And this waste goes into all the waterways and damages all the waterways and the environment next to them as well. There was an expose by, of a company called Marine Harvest, and they were, the fish were seen to have anemia, lice, heart disease, chlamydia, and the fish were also dyed from grey to red to pink as well, because everybody wants to buy the lovely pink, fleshy salmon, juicy salmon sort of thing, but actually the reality is far from that. And these fish also have the fighting, they have injuries from fighting, high mortality rates, and very, very poor water quality when they're swimming in as well. Now, I mentioned lice there as well, so obviously nobody would want to buy a fish if you're going into a fishmonger's and you're seeing a salmon lying on the slab, on the ice, with the dead eyes looking up at you, and you have lice coming out of it. So the salmon farms will try their best to get rid of all the lice before you get to you. So there's two methods they use, a hydrolyser or a thermolyser. Hydrolysers are basically where they will shoot jets of water at the fish at very, very high pressure to blow the lice off the fish. Now, in the Scottish farms alone, in the period 2016 to 2019, there was 270,000 fish killed by hydrolysing. So this sort of gives you a bit of, a measure of the scale in terms of the number of fish. If they are prepared to lose 270,000 fish through this hydrolysing method, there are millions and millions of fish going through these farms. Okay. Then you also have thermolysers. Now, thermolysers work obviously by using heat. So they will heat the temperature of the water up to essentially burn, get rid of, make the, kill the lice, or to make them drop off and then they kill them, they die in the water. But they're heating them up to temperatures of up to 34 degrees. The normal temperature for the fish to be in is about 14 degrees. So you're heating them up 20 degrees more than what they're used to. And obviously the fish are kind of like burning alive. They're getting so stressed because the heat is not what they're used to. And it's horrendous. But again, in the same period in these Scottish farms, over those 3 years, 117,000 fish die this way through the thermolysers. Okay. And 250 farms in Scotland, which is the biggest producer of salmon for the table, 70% of them are RSPCA approved. And we've mentioned in the past, the issues with Quality Meat Scotland and the Red Tractor. They're not worth the paper they're written on, because the inspectors cannot be there every single minute of the day. They do not know what's going on all the time, and they will do spot checks rather than frequent, consistent checks. So don't be fooled. It's a marketing myth. It really, really is. So now let's go on to the slaughter. Okay, the slaughter methods of these fish. I mean, a lot of people don't sort of give much thought to how fish are slaughtered. The main method is asphyxiation, so equivalent to putting your dog in water and holding it down. The fish are dragged out and they are asphyxiating in the air, they're suffocating in the air. Okay, farm fish will they'll be taken to slaughter, but they suffer starvation before they go to slaughter, and suffer all the stress of being transported as well. And they are, they'll have a carbon dioxide stun or percussive stun, which is basically somebody brain them with a stunner, and killing them. Or there's live chilling as well. So you'll have the fish which are put on ice and are literally freezing to death and suffocate to death at the same time. Okay, so I can't imagine an absolutely a more horrendous way to die. It's just absolutely brutal. But also, if that's not enough, other methods are used, which is gill cutting. So gill cutting, obviously, we know that the gills are used by the fish to breathe, and they'll cut the gills off so that they can't breathe properly, they can't filter the air coming in, and also they just bleed to death as well. Another method is immersion in salt. So they'll put them in salt and then they gut them while they're alive. Okay. Now, interestingly, there's no agreed requirements right across the fish industry for killing methods. So a farm can use any one of these methods. Okay. None of them are particularly pleasant. None of them are humane. Okay. I mentioned briefly before about the dolphin-friendly tuna as well. So certification, you say, like MSC certificated on tins of fish, kind of like giving you sort of like trying to reassure you that dolphins have been hurt in the production of these, the production of killing the fish you're eating at the moment. But this is an absolute myth as well. If you watch Seaspiracy, which is a very, very topical documentary at the moment about the fishing industries, and you'll see that the certification authorities are very, very, very under-resourced in terms of the human inspectors to go out and check what's going on. And also there's a lot of intimidation goes on with the inspectors. They are they are expected to turn a blind eye, because it's a multi-billion-pound industry every single year, and there's an awful lot of corruption and things like that which go on. Excuse me. Let's look at the health part of it now as well. So Dr. Michael Claper, he is a respected plant-based physician in America, and he does, he sort of like talks about he advocates for a plant-based living, but he also sort of like very clearly and with no nonsense sort of like gets rid of all the myths about sort of like plant-based issues. So one of the things he said about fish. Fish are full of mercury, they're full of dioxins, they have heavy metal pollutants as well. This is all, something which has been promoted as a healthy diet, But again, the omega-3 myth as well, people think, oh, you can get omega-3 from fish. You don't. You get omega-3 from what the fish eat, the algae, okay? You can also get omega-3 from things like flaxseed, chia seeds, and walnuts as well. Everybody can access walnuts, but that's where you're getting your omega-3 from what the fish are actually eating. It's a bit like the B12 myth, like people say, to vegans, where do you get your B12 from? We get ours from the meat. Well, no, you don't. You get yours from the injection that your meat has had when it was a live animal. It's exactly the same with the fish. Okay, there was a study of Finnish men a few years ago where that obviously Finnish, Finland is quite a high, they eat quite a lot of fish in their diet. And the study of Finnish men showed that they had high mercury levels in their hair, and also they have a higher incident rate of heart disease deaths. Okay, and PETA also, it's a PETA study which says that fish is the most common food, which causes stomach problems because like sickness because of the bacterial issues with fish. So if that's not enough to put you off, let's talk about the pain part of it as well. Now, fish feel pain. In fact, they do. There's enough studies out there now. What we sort of like, what we wonder is why it's taking so long for people to actually cotton on to the fact that, that fish feel pain. The European Food Safety Authority. Now, this is an authority which is, which actually looks after food safety. Like fish as food rather than fish as a sentient being, as an animal they care about. They are saying that fish in their studies show they can feel pain, they can feel fear, they form social groups, they can form relationships. Mark Beckhoff, who's an animal psychologist, he says the fish can display Machiavellian tendencies, so they have the intelligence to sort of look after themselves, look after their own little groups. They mutually cooperate with other groups as well. And he said they feel pain like humans. I used to have fish a long time ago. I used to have tropical fish. And I know that, that the fish would, if you put your hand in, they would avoid you. They learn certain patterns. They learn what to avoid. They know how to try to survive. They do things to survive. And they're very, very intelligent animals. So why do we feel as people that find it hard to believe? Is it because people are people see these animals as they have dead eyes, cold fish. They're the last animal given up. When people are transitioning to veganism, people will give up red meat, they'll give up pink meat, then they'll give up chickens, and then they'll say, "I'll just have a little bit of fish." Well, that's okay because the fish are just a little bit dead. So we've got to treat them all the same here. All these animals are all sentient beings. They all feel pain. So why do we think it's okay to say that fish don't feel pain as much as a cow? They do. They feel exactly the same. I also want to touch on angling and fishing is a leisure activity as well. Obviously, they don't have the massive impact on the environment and everything, but the reality is it's still not right. You still, you're treating a leisure activity. It's something like which, people are going along to have a bit of relaxation, a bit of sort of like a bit of chat with the people who are sitting there, a bit of leisure, a bit of fresh air and everything. But the bottom line is you're still killing an animal. You wouldn't think, nobody would think about putting their guinea pig, hooking it by putting a hook through its mouth and dragging it through a bath of water. That's what it is. That's what it is like. So why do we still need to ask whether fish feel pain? So I've covered an awful lot again there, so I'm going to shut up in a moment. What I would say is please watch Seaspiracy. Google things like, literally just put in, do fish feel pain in Google, or Ecosia, which is a really, really good tree planting Google search equivalent. If you put things like that in, these studies will come up and they'll show you quite categorically that fish do feel pain. But please watch Seaspiracy, and also please watch our interview with Captain Paul Watson from Sea Shepherd, which will be airing at 11 o'clock next week. So I'm going to sign off now. My sources today for the information and the facts I've given you have come from Peter, from Viva, from Seaspiracy, but also from NIA's Educational Resources Library as well. So this is Anna Amelia from North East Animal Rights signing off and saying thank you very much and hope to see you today in Newcastle. Bye for now.